Harold Green wasn't supposed to find anything. That was the truth of ham radio. You bought a battered transceiver, slapped a long wire up into the trees, and listened to static. Most nights it was nothing but hiss and the occasional trucker, or late-night chatter from somewhere far away. A hobby, a way to pass the time. But on the night of April 23, 2031, Harold's static started talking back. It came in waves, a pulse, a regular thump under the hiss, like a heartbeat buried in noise. He frowned, tuning the dial with the practiced twist of a wrist that had spent decades in the hobby. His headphones crackled. He adjusted again, and then he heard it. Not English, not Spanish, not anything, just something. A series of tones rising and falling, perfectly structured, repeating after exactly 27 seconds. Now that's not nothing, Harold muttered. He grabbed a pen, started scribbling, the numbers of the frequency and the timestamps in a notebook. His cat, lounging on the desk, flicked an ear but offered no help. At first, Harold thought it was some military experiment, maybe one of those deep space probes bouncing signals. But the rhythm was too clean, too mathematical, too intentional. He recorded a sample, uploaded it to one of the ham radio forums under the subject line, "Strange repeating signal. Anyone else hearing this?" The spark, the forum exploded. Within hours, people from as far as Poland and Brazil confirmed they were picking up the same thing. Someone ran the sequence through a spectrogram and found embedded patterns, grids, fractals, numbers. By morning, SETI was involved. Harold's inbox filled with messages from reporters he'd never heard of. Government men in suits came knocking, asking to see his equipment. For once, Harold wasn't paranoid. He gave them everything. By the end of the week, the White House press secretary confirmed what everyone already suspected. The signal wasn't natural. It was a distress call, and it hadn't been aimed at Earth. The debate. The translation was crude. The signal used mathematics and physics constants as a universal framework. What humanity could parse boiled down to three things: coordinates, a star system thousands of light years away; identity, a civilization calling itself the Sithari Confederation; plea, help us, or we perish. The world split overnight. Half the planet screamed, ignore it. We can barely feed ourselves, the pundits said. What business do we have saving aliens? Others said it was a trap. The Dominion, whoever they were, would bait humanity into sticking its head out and chop it off. But the other half, the dreamers, the stubborn ones, argued something else. They called for help. Someone has to answer. The United Nations convened an emergency session. Delegates shouted across marble chambers, sweat glistening under hot lights. The Chinese ambassador warned of wasting resources. The American delegate argued for moral responsibility. The Brazilian representative slammed his fist and said, "If not us, who?" Behind the speeches, a quiet movement stirred. Engineers, scientists, ex-military officers, people who didn't wait for permission. They saw the message not as a burden, but as a challenge, humanity's greatest challenge. The builders, it started small. Aerospace companies dusted off blueprints for experimental drives that had never left paper. Universities unlocked secret labs. Backyard tinkerers welded together components in garages. The key was the signal itself. Hidden in the distress call were fragments of exotic physics, breadcrumbs meant to help an ally cross the stars. The math was beyond Earth's current science, but not impossibly so. FTL, faster-than-light travel, wasn't science fiction anymore. Not when the numbers were right there, embedded in alien cries for help. The first prototypes were ugly. Cargo freighters with nuclear engines lashed to improvised fold space generators. No sleek saucers, no Star Trek elegance, just human stubbornness wrapped in steel and duct tape, and people volunteered. God, did they volunteer. Soldiers who'd fought in deserts and jungles signed up to fight again, even without knowing what awaited them. Medics, engineers, pilots, translators, they lined up in droves, not for money, not for glory, for something purer, the chance to matter. The leap on August 12, 2042, 11 years after Harold first caught the static, the first human expedition launched. The ISS Dauntless led the fleet, a repurposed freighter stuffed with fold space coils and bristling with missiles. Around it swarmed a dozen smaller craft, some military, some civilian. They were held together by hope, prayers, and an uncomfortable amount of duct tape. Families gathered on beaches and rooftops to watch streaks of fire claw into the sky. The broadcasts went global. For the first time in decades, Earth felt united, not by fear, not by war, but by purpose. The fold space jump was chaos. Half the ships reported catastrophic failures. 2 never emerged. But 9 vessels limped out the other side into alien stars, and what they saw broke them. The dying Confederation, the Sithari Confederation, was a graveyard, planets scarred by bombardment, stations flickering with failing power, refugee arcs drifting, life support failing, packed with civilians on the edge of death. The Dominion, humanity would learn their name later, had ravaged the system. And the survivors didn't trust newcomers. When the human fleet broadcast greetings, Sithari cruisers turned weapons on them. The aliens, insectoid and elegant, hissed that this must be another Dominion trick. The humans didn't argue. They didn't posture. They went to work. First contact in Fireite started with one act. The Dauntless maneuvered alongside a crippled refugee barge whose reactors were seconds from meltdown. Human engineers suited up, crossed the void, and jury-rigged a fix, using tools that shouldn't have worked on alien tech. When the reactor stabilized, thousands of Sithari lives were saved. For the first time in years, hope flickered, and then the Dominion arrived. A raiding flotilla warped in. Sleek black warships bristling with weapons humanity had no chance against. But humans fight anyway. That's what we do. The Dauntless launched. Every missile. Civilian ships jury-rigged railguns and fired scrap metal. One freighter rammed a Dominion destroyer head-on, detonating its reactor in a flash brighter than a sun. It was madness, reckless, unthinkable. And it worked. The Dominion retreated. The Sithari watched, stunned, as a species that should have fled. Instead, threw themselves into fire for strangers they didn't even know. Aftermath. When the battle ended, the human fleet was wrecked. Hulls scarred, crews bleeding, ammunition gone, but they were alive, and so were the Sithari civilians. On open comms, a Dominion commander snarled, "Why do you fight? This isn't your war." The human captain of the Dauntless answered, voice raw and steady. "You called for help. That's all we needed to know." Harold back on Earth, Harold Green sat in his cluttered workshop, headphones on, cat purring in his lap. The static that had once been lonely hiss was now alive with voices from across the stars. Human voices, alien voices, history unfolding, and Harold smiled, knowing he had been the first to hear the call that changed everything. Ambassador Elena Markovich hated the marble. It was polished, gleaming, older than most of the men shouting across it. The United Nations chamber was meant to inspire awe, a cathedral of diplomacy. But tonight, under hot lights and the weight of history pressing on her shoulders, it just looked like a tomb. "Order!" the Secretary General bellowed, though no one listened. Delegates from 190 nations shouted, waved papers, slammed fists. The signal, the alien signal, hung in the air like smoke. For 3 weeks, humanity had known the truth. We were not alone. Someone out there was calling for help. And now the question wasn't whether we could respond, but whether we should. The chorus of fear. The message could be a trick. The Russian delegate roared, his voice echoing against the chamber walls. Some hostile civilization baiting us into revealing our existence. If we respond, we invite annihilation. From across the hall, the Nigerian representative stood tall. We didn't reveal anything. They already know how to speak across the stars. Whoever sent this, friend or foe, already knows we're here. Ignoring them changes nothing. The Chinese ambassador leaned forward, his voice like sharpened steel. And even if it is real, what then? We bleed our treasuries dry, starve our people, chasing fantasies of war light years away? Our responsibility is to Earth, our people. Murmurs of agreement rippled, fear, pragmatism, the language of survival. Elena clenched her jaw. She had expected this. The file in front of her contained pages of notes, but she didn't need them. She could feel the answer burning in her chest. The same way she had when she'd first heard the transmission. Help us, or we perish. That wasn't a military provocation. That wasn't politics. That was the sound of a child screaming in a burning house. And what kind of species turned away from that? Elena's turn. When the chair finally gave her the floor, she rose slowly, smoothing her dark suit. The microphone clicked. The chamber quieted, if only out of exhaustion. Colleagues, she began, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. We stand at a crossroads history will remember for 1,000 years, maybe 10,000, perhaps until the stars themselves go dark. A few eyes rolled. She ignored them. We did not ask for this call. We did not provoke it. But it came to us, not because we are strong, but because we are here. Because someone believed enough in the mercy of the universe to cry for help into the void. She paused, scanning the room. Some delegates looked away. Others glared. More leaned forward, listening. We all know what it is to cry out and be ignored. Every nation in this chamber has known war, famine, disaster, and every one of us at some point prayed someone would answer. Do we really intend to tell the galaxy that humanity of all species, would rather turn its back? The chamber stirred. A few claps rose, quickly silenced. Elena pressed on. Yes, it is dangerous. Yes, it is costly. But the cost of doing nothing is far greater. If we choose silence, if we let them die, then the day will come when we cry for help, and we will deserve the silence that answers us. She sat. The chamber buzzed. The debate raged anew. The outside world outside those marble walls, humanity was already choosing. On the streets of New York, murals bloomed, streaks of stars, and alien faces painted by kids who dreamed of touching them. In Nairobi, students held candlelight vigils, whispering prayers not just for Earth, but for the unknown lives at stake. In Sao Paulo, engineers stayed up nights sketching drive designs on napkins. Not everyone was hopeful. Protests erupted in Berlin and Tokyo, placards reading Earth First and No More Wars. Talk radio screamed about conspiracies, doomsday prophecies, biblical warnings. But one truth became clear. Humanity couldn't ignore this forever. The signal was spreading across the planet. Copied, decoded, shared. Every teenager with a laptop could play the eerie alien tones. Every grandmother could hum the rhythm of a desperate people light years away, and every one of them was asking the same question. Will we answer? Behind closed doors in the evenings, Elena met with a smaller council, representatives of the nations with real spacefaring infrastructure. The United States, China, Russia, the European Union, India, Brazil, a handful more. These meetings were quieter, sharper, more dangerous. Even if we send ships, the French representative said, we'll be sending coffins. Our drives can't cross those distances. Our weapons are useless against unknown enemies. It will be suicide. Then we learn, Elena countered. We build, we try. The Indian delegate nodded slowly. There are equations in the message, physics we don't. Yet understand, It's as if they left breadcrumbs hoping an ally could follow. The Russian smirked. Or traps. No, said the Brazilian, slamming his palm on the table. If it was a trap, they'd have come here already. They're dying, not hunting. Silence followed. For the first time, Elena saw cracks in the wall of fear. The vote. The UN didn't decide with thunder. It decided with weariness. After weeks of shouting, of speeches, of midnight arguments in smoky rooms, the final resolution came down to a single vote. The motion to form an international coalition dedicated to investigating, responding, and, if possible, assisting the originators of the distress signal. The tally was close, too close. But when the last light blinked green, Elena felt tears sting her eyes. Humanity had chosen, not unanimously, not easily, not cleanly, but chosen all the same. We would answer. Elena alone. That night, in her small New York apartment, Elena poured herself a glass of wine and stared out at the skyline. She knew what was coming. The years of sacrifice. The budgets that would gut social programs, the protests, the funerals of the first who dared to cross the stars. She knew she would be called a fool, a dreamer, a reckless idealist. Maybe she was, but somewhere out there, a voice was still echoing through the void. Help us, or we perish. And Elena whispered into the night, glass raised like a promise. We're coming. Elena Markovich had learned long ago that laws moved slower than dreams. The ink on the resolution authorizing a coalition response to the alien distress call was barely dry, yet the world outside was already racing ahead of her. Nations squabbled over funding, committees bickered over oversight, and still, the builders had begun. They didn't wait for permission. They never did. Sparks in the Dark Inn, a cavernous hangar outside Houston, an engineer named David, Wu wiped grease from his hands and stared at the monster of a ship rising from scaffolds. It wasn't beautiful. Nothing like the sleek starships of science fiction. The Dauntless had started life as a container freighter, all square edges and rusted steel. Now it bristled with welded-on plating, jury-rigged reactor housings, and a prototype fold-space coil so large it bulged from the hull like a tumor. You're insane, his coworker muttered, checking a readout that was more guesswork than science. David grinned. Insane enough to win, he didn't know if the drive would work. No one did. The equations pulled from the Sithari distress call were tantalizing fragments, half-understood math about space-time geometries and energy densities far beyond human norms. Entire research teams had spent sleepless months just trying to make sense of it. But where academia hesitated, builders like David improvised. You know what the Sithari left us? He told a group of tired engineers one night. A cheat sheet. We don't have to understand all the math. We just have to build something that doesn't explode long enough to work. The hangar erupted in laughter, half delirious, half terrified. But they kept welding. Volunteers. They came in waves. Soldiers who couldn't sleep without the sound of artillery. Medics who remembered too many children gasping in tents. Pilots who missed the sky. Civilians who had nothing left to lose. The recruitment. Offices overflowed. There weren't enough uniforms, so people wore their own clothes with patches sewn on. There weren't enough ships, so they stripped old cargo vessels, oil rigs, even decommissioned submarines. Among them was Maya Ortiz, a 26-year-old paramedic from Mexico City. She'd watched her mother die in a hospital, overwhelmed during the last pandemic wave, and something inside her had broken. They called for help, she told the recruiter, eyes burning. I couldn't save her, but I can save them. No one turned her away. Elena's war Elena Markovich fought a different battle. Every day she stood before committees demanding budgets that didn't exist. Every night she soothed ambassadors, terrified of pouring billions into a suicide mission. And in between, she buried herself in reports from places like Houston, like Sao Paulo, like Mumbai, where real people were already moving faster. Then the politicians. "You don't understand," she snapped once at a finance minister from Europe who demanded more cost estimates. "The money is already being spent. The ships are already being built. You can either stand in front of the tide or learn to ride it. But it's coming." She was exhausted. But she had never felt more alive. Soldiers of a new war on a training field in Nevada, Captain Marcus Hall watched a line of recruits fire at scrap drones. The weapons were old, the armor worse. But the eyes behind the helmets burned with something he hadn't seen since his grandfather's stories about World War II. Determination. "They're not ready," his adjutant whispered. "They'll never be ready," Marcus said, "but they'll go anyway, and that's what matters." The Dominion, though the name wasn't yet known to him, had ships the size of cities and weapons that bent physics. But Marcus had seen a single human with a rifle hold a hill for hours against tanks. He knew what willpower could do. And if the aliens needed saving, then humanity would bleed for them. The first test, the first prototype fold space drive test, was carried out in orbit above the moon. Engineers crowded monitoring stations, praying. Politicians held their breath. Billions of eyes watched live feeds. The vessel, an unmanned cargo hulk nicknamed Hopeful, activated its coil. Space bent. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then the ship vanished. Gasps, cheers, terror. 21 minutes later, the Hopeful reappeared, spinning wildly, hull scorched. Its communication array was dead, half its systems fried, but it was back. David. Wu wept into his hands. "We did it." The builders unite. That test changed everything. Funding poured in, grudgingly at first, then in torrents. Every nation wanted a stake. Rival companies formed joint ventures overnight. Rivals in politics found themselves shaking hands in dark corners. And still, the true work was done by hands blistered from welding, backs sore from lifting, minds numb from endless calculations. Ships rose from the skeletons of freighters, from the bones of naval carriers, from the imagination of people who refused to accept impossible. Elena and the engineer Elena toured the Houston facility 6 months after the Hopeful test. She wore a hard hat, steel-toed boots, her diplomat's suit sweating under the Texas sun. David Wu guided her past scaffolds, explaining how they'd nearly blown up 3 times that week. She listened, nodded, asked careful questions. At the end of the tour, she stopped him. "Why are you doing this? You could be teaching at MIT. Safe, respected." David looked at her, eyes red with exhaustion. "Because they asked. Isn't that enough?" She felt her throat tighten. She reached out, squeezed his grease-stained hand. "Yes," she whispered. "It is." The whisper of doubt not. Everyone agreed. A senator went viral railing against wasting human lives for alien strangers. A general warned of provoking forces beyond our understanding. Some religious leaders called the signal a devil's temptation. But the ships kept rising. The builders didn't care about politics. They cared about the child whose voice had traveled light years, begging for help. They cared about the chance. To prove that humanity was more than war, more than greed, more than selfish survival. And in quiet corners, even the skeptics felt a spark of pride. The first crew, 1 year after the Hopeful test, the ISS Dauntless, stood ready. Its hull was scarred, its systems experimental, its weapons laughable against imagined alien fleets. But it had a crew. Maya Ortiz, paramedic turned starfarer. Marcus Hall, soldier turned captain. David Wu, engineer turned miracle worker, and hundreds. More like them, farmers, miners, pilots, dreamers. They weren't the best humanity had. They were simply the ones who showed up. Elena stood on the launch platform, microphone trembling in her hand, the world watching. "You are the first," she told them. "Not the first to fight, not the first to dream, but the first to carry all of us into the stars. You go with our hopes, our fears, and our prayers, and you go with one truth above all: humanity answers." The roar that followed shook her to her bones. The builder's legacy. That night, as the Dauntless prepared for its maiden jump, Elena sat alone in her office. The city outside glittered, unaware of how small it truly was in the scale of the cosmos. She thought of Harold Green, the ham radio operator who had first heard the static. She thought of David Wu, Maya Ortiz, Marcus Hall, all ordinary people who had built something extraordinary. She thought of the voice that still whispered across the stars, "Help us, or we perish." And she whispered back, almost a prayer, "Hold on. We're coming." The static hummed in her memory. The builders had answered, humanity had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. The hangar bay thrummed with a nervous energy that words could never capture. Every bootstep echoed too loud, every voice seemed too sharp, every laugh forced. The Dauntless was about to attempt something no human crew had ever survived: a manned, fold-space jump across the void. Captain Marcus Hall stood on the command deck, helmet tucked under one arm, staring at the blue planet framed in the viewport. Earth, home, fragile, beautiful, stubborn Earth. His throat tightened. How many of them would never see it again? "All stations report ready," his XO said. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles whitened against her clipboard. Marcus nodded, slow and deliberate. "Then let's make history." Maya in the medbay. Maya Ortiz checked her supplies for the 10th time. Bandages, sutures, IVs, oxygen canisters. She'd packed them all, but her hands kept moving, restless. What good were stitches if the ship itself ripped apart in the jump? What good was morphine if fold space shredded their atoms across 1,000,000 kilometers? She caught her reflection in the mirror above the surgical tray. Dark eyes, hair tied back, a single streak of gray at her temple, though she was only 26. She looked older. She felt older. "Scared?" one of the nurses asked, voice trembling. Maya forced a smile. "Terrified. That means we're human." They laughed, a brittle sound, but it steadied the room. David Wu didn't have time for fear. Not yet. His engineers crowded around the reactor core, checking gauges, muttering equations, slapping panels that rattled like loose teeth. The fold space coil hummed, eager and unstable. "This thing shouldn't even exist," one muttered. David grinned, manic with exhaustion. "That's what makes it fun." He wasn't lying. He felt alive in a way he never had at MIT, never had, in those sterile labs. Here, every weld, every calculation mattered. Here, history balanced on the tip of a screwdriver. If the math held, they'd slip into fold space, cross a gulf of light years, and emerge where no human had ever been. If the math didn't, David refused to think about that. The world watches on Earth, billions of eyes fixed on screens. In New York, Elena Markovich sat at the front of the UN assembly, headset pressed against her ear. She had fought tooth and nail for this moment, and now her stomach twisted with dread. Her aide whispered, "If this fails, you'll be finished." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because if this failed, it wouldn't just be her career. It would be humanity's last chance to matter beyond its own orbit. The countdown. "Final systems check," Marcus said. "All compartments sealed." "Medbay ready? Reactor stable?" "Mostly." "Navigational coordinates locked." Marcus swallowed hard. His crew stared at him, waiting. They were tired, scared, untrained for what they faced. And yet not one of them asked to go back. "Then let's leap!" The reactor roared. Lights dimmed. Space itself seemed to shiver. The coil's hum grew into a shriek that rattled teeth and bones alike. 3, 2, 1. Reality tore. Fold space Maya screamed without sound. Not because she was afraid, but because her body no longer understood what it was. Time stretched, compressed, reversed. She was both 26 and unborn. She smelled her grandmother's perfume and the copper tang of her own blood. David clung to his console, eyes wide as the readouts went insane, numbers looping, dimensions collapsing, energy spiking into negative infinity. "Hold together," he begged the ship. "Just hold together." Marcus forced his eyes open against the impossible. The viewport wasn't black anymore. It was a whirlpool of colors that hurt to see, galaxies twisting into spirals of liquid light. He gripped the captain's chair until his knuckles bled, and then silence. The price. When the Dauntless re-emerged, the crew cheered. For one heartbeat, relief drowned out everything. Then the reports started coming in. 2 escort ships hadn't made it. Another was spinning, reactor breached, crew gone. Out of the 9 that had jumped, only 5 survived. Maya's medbay filled with broken bodies, burns from radiation spikes, bones shattered by inertial whiplash, eyes blinded from light. That shouldn't exist. She worked without thought, hands moving faster than her brain until blood slicked her gloves and her arms shook. David sat against a bulkhead, trembling, whispering, "It worked! It worked! God help us! It worked!" Marcus forced his voice, steady on comms. "All surviving ships, form up. We made it. Now let's see where we are." Sithari space. The stars ahead weren't like Earth's. Brighter, harsher, tinted with strange hues. But what caught every eye wasn't the stars. It was the wreckage. Charred stations drifting like corpses. Planets scarred black from bombardments. Refugee arcs tumbling in silence, their lights flickering. The Sithari Confederation, whoever they were, had been dying for a long time. And humanity had arrived in the middle of the graveyard. "Captain," a sensor officer whispered, "I'm detecting survivors, scattered, barely holding on." Marcus's jaw clenched. He thought of the Dominion raiders that might still be lurking, of the frailty of his fleet. He thought of Elena's words back on Earth, of the vote, of every soul watching right now. He tapped the comm. "This is Captain Marcus Hall of the United Nations Interstellar Ship Dauntless. To any who can hear me, you are not alone. Humanity has answered." Static crackled. Then, faint and broken, a voice replied, chittering, alien, desperate. Maya felt tears sting her eyes. David stared in awe. Marcus straightened in his chair. The leap was over. The war was beginning. The first survivor they pulled aboard the Dauntless didn't look anything like the movies. Its body was lean, insectoid, with chitinous plates cracked and scorched. 4 arms, 2 folded against its chest in what might have been instinct or prayer. Its mandibles clicked weakly, froth bubbling from a wound along its thorax. The crew froze. A dozen humans staring at something undeniably alien, undeniably dying. Then Maya Ortiz stepped forward. "Clear a path," she snapped. "It's bleeding. Doesn't matter what color." The medics jolted into motion. Maya, her gloves slipped against. Slick green ichor. The Sithari's breathing was shallow, irregular. She didn't know the anatomy, didn't know if she was holding a lung, a liver, or something else entirely. But she knew bleeding when she saw it. She knew shock. "Clamp," she said, and her nurse handed her a tool. The alien writhed weakly. Its black eyes, compound shimmering, locked onto hers. For a heartbeat, she felt it. Not words, not thoughts, just raw fear. She leaned close, whispering as if it could understand. "Stay with me. You called for help. We came." The pulse steadied under her hands. She worked faster. By the time she stepped back, soaked in green, The alien still lived. Marcus captain. Marcus Hall watched from the medbay doorway, arms crossed. His crew looked at him, searching his face for some kind of verdict. Friend? Foe? Burden? He didn't answer them. Instead, he keyed his comm. Bridge, put out a wideband transmission. Repeat it every 5 minutes. What message, sir? Marcus stared at the insectoid alien breathing weakly on the table. Tell them, humanity answers. David in the engineering bay, David Wu crouched beside a salvaged Sithari escape pod. Its panels were riddled with holes, its systems burned out, but the core architecture fascinated him. Sleek conduits, modular power relays, materials lighter and stronger than anything Earth produced. Look at this, he whispered to his team. They're 20, maybe 30 years ahead in some areas, but in others, we're catching up. One engineer frowned. You think we can actually integrate this? David grinned, running a hand across the alloy. We're not just here to save them. We're here to learn. If we survive, humanity leaps a century forward. But even as he said it, he felt a chill. Because wreckage like this meant someone had been very intent on destroying the Sithari. Elena, Earthside. Back on Earth, Elena Markovich barely slept. Reports streamed in through encrypted channels. Contact made, survivors aboard, alien physiology critical, news outlets ran wild. Some called it proof of angels, others screamed of demons. Protesters filled streets. Save Earth first, while others lit candles in vigil. Elena ignored them all. She stared at the grainy images of Sithari survivors on stretchers, her throat tight. Hold on, she whispered. Just hold on. Trustin, the second day, the rescued Sithari began to stir. Maya was there when the first one fully woke. It hissed, limbs jerking, until she raised her hands slowly, palms open. Universal body language. I mean no harm. Easy, she murmured. You're safe. The alien clicked its mandibles, sound like glass breaking. Then, hesitantly, it mirrored her. Gesture, raising 2 of its arms, palms open. Around them, the humans froze. Maya felt tears sting her eyes. It was nothing more than mimicry, maybe instinct. But it was a bridge. Doubt not everyone celebrated. A junior officer cornered Marcus outside the mess. Sir, with respect, why are we risking everything for them? We lost 4 ships in the jump. We've got wounded piling up. And for what? A species that couldn't even defend itself? Marcus stared at him. The officer flushed, but didn't back down. Finally, Marcus said, because they asked. His voice was iron. And because if it were Earth out there, burning, don't you think we'd want someone to answer? The officer dropped his eyes. The raid. The alarm came 3 days after arrival. Multiple contacts, the sensor chief shouted. Small craft, inbound fast. Vector matches raider patterns. Marcus swore. Dominion raiders. The Dauntless wasn't. Ready for a fight. Its guns were old, its crew untested. But retreat meant leaving the Sithari to die. All hands to battle stations, Marcus barked. Form a defensive line around the refugee arcs. The raiders came screaming out of the void, sleek and sharp like predators. Weapons fire lit the black fire, and Blood Maya's medbay filled within minutes. Burned flesh, shrapnel wounds, smoke. Choking the air recyclers, she moved like a machine, fear shoved deep into her bones. One young Marine grabbed her wrist, blood bubbling from his lips. Worth it, he rasped. She looked him in the eyes, even as her hands kept pressure on his. Yes, she said firmly, always worth it. He smiled before the light left his eyes. David's gamble in engineering, David's team worked furiously to jury-rig the alien power cells into the Dauntless's shields. It wasn't tested, it wasn't safe, but safety was a luxury long gone. Do it, he shouted. The ship shuddered as energy surged. Shields flared brighter, holding against another volley. Cheers erupted through engineering. David sagged against the console, heart pounding. Humanity had borrowed alien strength, and it had worked. The choice on the bridge, Marcus's options narrowed. They were outgunned, bleeding, one good hit from ruin. He had to choose. Cut and run, saving what was left of his crew, or hold the line and risk annihilation for strangers. He thought of Earth. He thought of Elena's speech. He thought of the voice in the static. Help us, or we perish. Stand. Your ground, he ordered. The Dauntless roared back with every gun it had. The turn, just as the line began to break, Sithari signals lit up comms. Not distress. Coordination. The survivors they'd rescued had patched into the systems, feeding targeting data, amplifying shield harmonics. For the first time, humans and Sithari fought together, and the Dominion raiders, unprepared for resistance, broke off. One by one, they vanished into fold space. Aftermath. Silence returned, but it was heavy, broken only by groans and static. The Dauntless floated among wreckage, battered but alive. Marcus exhaled, muscles trembling. Report. Casualties heavy. But we held, sir. We held. In medbay, Maya sat beside the first alien she'd saved. It reached out one trembling limb and touched her wrist gently, like it understood gratitude. She smiled through tears. David, slumped in engineering, whispered to no one. We can do this. We really can. And on Earth, Elena Markovich read the report of humanity's first battle among the stars. She closed her eyes, whispered a prayer for the dead, and felt something else rise in her chest, hope. The air on the Dauntless was thick with smoke and disinfectant. Repairs groaned through every bulkhead, welders throwing sparks into corridors, medics rushing stretchers to overfilled bays. Humanity's first victory among the stars had cost, more than anyone wanted to admit. But the true reckoning hadn't even begun. Captain Marcus Hall, stood in the briefing room, helmet on the table, jaw clenched. His officers filled the seats, tired, soot-streaked, haunted. At the far end of the table, a hollow projector hummed. The image wasn't human. The Sithari survivor they had pulled from wreckage, the one Maya had saved, stood unsteady, its carapace bandaged in patches. Its mandibles clicked in uneven rhythm. Around its torso, translators scavenged from its escape pod pulsed with uncertain light. Marcus leaned forward. You've been trying to tell us about the enemy. We're listening. Now, who are they? The alien tilted its head. Then the translator crackled, turning insectile clicks into broken metallic English. They are Dominion. They do not conquer for land. They harvest. A shiver ran through the room. Maya Ortiz stood at the edge of the briefing, arms crossed. She still smelled of antiseptic, her scrubs spattered with human and alien blood alike. The Sithari's voice was metallic, distorted, but the meaning came through. Harvest. The word sank claws into her chest. She thought of the wounded she had lost in the last raid, humans and Sithari both. Were they just food to the Dominion, fuel, or something worse? The Sithari's compound eyes swept the room. We fought for centuries, Confederation strong once, millions of ships, billions of warriors. Dominion broke us, not because we were weak, because they never stop. Maya saw her crew shift uncomfortably. For the first time since the leap, hope wavered. David Wu sat forward, unable to contain himself. How? How do they fight? Their tech, their ships, what are we up against? The Sithari paused, mandibles grinding. Then the projector flared to life, projecting shapes that made David's stomach turn. Dominion vessels. They weren't sleek, like Sithari craft, nor utilitarian like Earth's. They looked alive, organic hulls bristling with growths, armor like bone, weapons that seemed to pulse with arterial light. They grow ships, the translator rasped. Biometal, self-repair, self-birth. Destroy one, It seeds two more. They consume wreckage. They consume prisoners. David's mouth went dry. You're saying, yes. Your dead feed their war. They, room fell silent. Elena, Earthside. In New York, Elena Markovich sat before the UN Council, a live stream of the Sithari briefing flickering on the vast screen. Gasps echoed as the alien described the Dominion, its voice translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. One delegate slammed his fist on the table. This is madness. We cannot fight this. Another hissed, and yet we already have. If we retreat now, they will follow the scent of blood to Earth itself. Elena said nothing. She only watched the Sithari's mandibles click, the haunted look in Marcus Hall's eyes. The galaxy had changed, and Earth was no longer hidden in its corner. Marcus, again. Marcus forced himself to breathe. His crew's morale was cracking. He could see it in their hunched shoulders, the restless tapping of fingers. "What do they want with you?" he asked. The Sithari lowered its head. "We were first strong, rich stars. Dominion wanted our cores. Our seed worlds, they take resources, but more, they take voices, minds. They use memory." "Memory?" Marcus echoed. The translator buzzed, glitching. "They eat not just body, they eat thought. They learn you, wear you, until you are them." A cold weight settled in Marcus's gut. This wasn't just a war of survival. It was annihilation of identity. Maya, again. After the briefing, Maya sat in med bay, staring at the first Sithari she had saved. Its breathing rasped through cracked plates. "You're dying," she whispered. "All of you. And now us too." The alien raised a trembling limb. Its claw brushed her wrist gently, the same way it had days ago. The translator on its chest sparked. "Die alone, certain. Die together, chance." Maya swallowed hard. The galaxy wasn't offering salvation, just a choice in how to fall. David, again. In engineering, David pulled apart a Dominion fragment they had salvaged from wreckage. It writhed even in death, tendrils twitching like a muscle spasm. His team recoiled. "Don't touch it," one hissed, but David leaned closer, fascinated. The structure was both metal and flesh, nerve and circuit. "It's learning," he realized aloud. "Even dead, it's recording us." The fragment pulsed once, faintly, then went still. David stepped back, heart racing. "They know we're here." Marcus, final. Marcus stood on the bridge hours later, staring at the stars. His fleet floated, battered. His crew exhausted, the Sithari barely clinging to life. But the greater truth pressed down on him. Earth was no longer safe. The moment the Dominion realized humanity had stepped into the war, they would come. And David's report confirmed it. The Dominion already knew. Marcus closed his eyes. He thought of Elena's words. He thought of Maya's hands, steady on alien wounds. He thought of David's manic grin in the face of impossible science. Then he opened them, steel in his voice. "Signal Earth. Tell them the truth. The Dominion is coming, and humanity has one choice, stand or perish." The stars outside seemed colder than ever. But Marcus Hall had never felt more certain. The enemy's shadow stretched toward Earth, and humanity would not run.